two young ladies standing behind me, Mary and Emily Edmondson, were part of the largest attempt escape of enslaved persons in the history of this country. And where did that happen? Texas, Louisiana, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Kentucky? Nope. Truth be told, it happened right in Washington, D.C. We first brought you The Sisters, which is the tale of an incident called the Pearl Incident in January 2022. We've now had the opportunity to travel to New Orleans to bring you the rest of the story and the fate of some of the recaptured enslaved Africans who ended up in a place much worse than Washington, D.C. I'm here at Algiers Point in New Orleans, Louisiana. You can see the Mississippi behind me, which is still a working river. Swing around, you'll see the skyline over to the right of me, and know that we're right here in the bend of the Mississippi. Algiers Point is one of the places where historically enslaved Africans were brought when they were first brought to New Orleans to be sold. We did a couple of video series. You may have seen them. One is called The Sisters. The other one is called Stolen Freedom. They have a direct connection with Algiers Point. In the video we did called The Sisters, it was about Mary and Emily Edmondson and others, 75 other enslaved persons who tried to escape from the Temple of Liberty, which is Washington, D.C., on a scooter named the Pearl. They weren't successful. They only made it as far as Point Lookout, Maryland, and then they were returned to Washington, D.C. But the unintended consequences of that escape attempt was that a bright light was shown on Washington, D.C., and that it, in fact, had enslaved persons, too. That began to turn the tide of slavery in America. In fact, to this day, Washington, D.C. has Emancipation Day because Washington, D.C. liberated its enslaved persons before anyone else. So the connection between the Pearl incident and Algiers Point is such that when these enslaved persons who tried to escape from Washington were caught, they were brought back to Washington, D.C., and in the rage of their enslavers and the general public, many of them were sold south. And being sold south meant being sold probably to Louisiana to come down here, work in the sugarcane fields and whatnot, in a horrific life that for an enslaved person would probably only be 10 or 15 years before the time of their death. Some of these enslaved persons ended up here at Algiers Point. Now, Mary and Emily, if you look them up, there are a few pictures of them that you can find online. You can see that they were young, attractive young ladies. Another horrific possible eventuality for them would have been to end up here in New Orleans, Louisiana, where the fancy market was. And the fancy market is where attractive, mostly bright-skinned, mulatto is what they call them, young ladies would end up, not to be sold as servants or as slaves or as housekeepers, but as concubines. So they would serve possibly under the madam all day in the kitchen and then under the master all night, or whoever else he determined he owed something to. Maybe it was his brother, maybe it was his uncle, maybe it was his cousin, maybe it was a guy just passing through town. This would be a horrific destination for any enslaved woman, and many of them ended up here. They were brought to the fancy market. Louisiana had many slave markets. They were brought to the fancy market where they would be dressed up, they would be coiffed, their hair would be done. Sometimes they would even be given jewelry, because for an enslaver, having a quote-unquote concubine was a status symbol. Along with everything else he had, plantations and fields and crops and animals, and of course, enslaved persons. If he had a concubine, that was like a status symbol, and they paid a lot for them. So here in Louisiana, at Algiers Point, is where many enslaved Africans, either from the coast of Africa or from Virginia, either North Carolina, or even further up in Maryland, will be brought here to the largest slave market in the country. Because after a certain point in America, you may not know this, the importation of slaves from Africa was illegal. And it wasn't because America discovered or had developed any kind of moral compass. It was because the tariff, the tax, was just entirely too much for anyone. It was all business. It was always business. By that time, there were enough enslaved persons in America that America was, quote unquote, I hate to use this term, breeding its own slaves. And Virginia was one of the largest slave breeding states in the country. And many of those enslaved persons were then, after they were born, they get around, 8, 9, 10 years old or whatever, would be sold south. Harriet Tubman's sisters were sold south. We don't know where, we've lost track of them. But more than most likely, they ended up here in Louisiana. Harriet Tubman watched 3 of her sisters be sold as she was a little bitty young girl. She never forgot it, and it hunted her the rest of her life. So here at Algiers Point is another bit of African American history, perhaps unknown, right here just across the Mississippi from the Big Easy. We're still in New Orleans, it's just across the Mississippi. And this is one of the places, there were many in New Orleans, this is just one of the places where enslaved persons would first set foot on American soil, unless they were coming from the deep South, and would end up in the parishes around here, many of whom were mosquito infested, one of which had a name which translated from the French, which was directly, a bad place to be. They ended up here working, digging sugar cane, chopping cotton, and whatever else their enslavers put them to work to do. Truth be told, you can find our history anywhere, because Black history is everywhere. All right, see you again real soon.
If you would like to see more videos like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon to receive our new releases. If you would like to assist Truth Be Told in our mission to preserve African American history, which is American history, please share this video with your children, family, and friends. Truth Be Told, you can find Black history anywhere, because our history is everywhere.